My name is Carla Chaman, and we are with Mr. Nicolas Eyzaguirre, Director of the Western Hemisphere Department at the IMF. Mr. Eyzaguirre, thank you for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
The Latin America region has done very well in coping with the financial crisis. What are the main factors that explain this unprecedented resilience in the region?
Actually, you're right. Latin America has coped quite well with the financial crisis. Actually, 2010 was a year with strong growth, nearly 6% for the region. We were growing just a bit short of Asia, but one of the regions that grew more in the world. What is behind this? Lots of factors, but basically that most policymakers in the region have learned the hard way through previous crises that, in a nutshell, you have to save in good times to be able to spend in bad times, or save for a rainy day, as they say. And that's what they did during the run-up to the crisis. So they did have ammunition to fight the crisis when it struck.
However, not all the countries, Nicolas, have escaped unharmed by the financial crisis. For instance, the impact in Central America was more severe than in the southern part of the region. What are the main issues, aspects that the region is facing now?
The world is experiencing what we have called a multi-speed recovery. The region, the Latin American region with the Caribbean, is also experiencing that type of recovery, with the countries in the south more dynamic, with Central America growing but not as fast as they could, and the Caribbean with lots of pending problems to grow back again as they did in the past. And another very salient feature that makes a difference among countries is that in South America they are, in trade terms, way more connected to Asia through basically the export of commodities. Central America is predominantly a commodity importer, as is the Caribbean. So you have these two elements playing differently in different parts of the hemisphere.
And what about the food prices? How this increase in the food prices will affect the region?
Well, no doubt that the increase in food and fuel prices will affect almost everybody. Of course, it will affect less the ones that produce oil or produce food, in terms that that will benefit the suppliers of those goods, but even so will affect the consumers. And this is particularly noticeable in the case of medium to low income countries, where food is probably half of the basket of consumption, as opposed to developed countries where the weight is way lower. So the food spike is a severe problem for the middle to poor segments of the population.
What are the types of reforms that the Latin American region needs for shaping its future?
We cannot have a one-size-fits-all recipe because there are different realities within the region. The first thing is to avoid falling again in this pattern of boom and bust that was so typical of the region. Whenever terms of trade were good, the region was flying. Whenever terms of trade suffered a shock, the region went to the floor. So what is very well known is that with this roller coaster kind of behavior, your average growth suffers a lot. So first, stabilize your economies, do not grow too much in periods of bonanza, save for a rainy day to be able to sort of mitigate the bad situation whenever it comes. So stabilize the economies. We have made a lot of progress in that domain. But to stabilize the speed, let's say, of a train is a different thing from what is the average speed that the train can afford. So let's go to the average speed now. There are important elements. First, we Latin Americans spend less in certain elements that are key for long-term growth. One is infrastructure. including the IT infrastructure, wiring the countries, having cheap access to internet and other things that can provide the basis for exporting services. So infrastructure is the first, and second, human capital. The human capital is lagging behind, so we need to spend more and especially better in education. That's one element. Second, regulation of the financial services is very important because there's going to be abundant liquidity, abundant credit, but you have to watch out not to replicate what happened among other countries in the United States. Third, regulation of natural monopolies. What's behind the high price of energy, of telecommunications, of land that sometimes you see in the region, and sometimes there is a lack of competition in domestic markets. That, I would say, is the third element. And fourth, last but not least, and because it's our domain, and I want to insist, keep your macroeconomy imbalance in check. Don't go too fast to avoid having to break down the road.
Okay, thank you so much, Nicolas.
Pleasure.